Well, good morning, Northside. My name is Jacob. I'm on the teaching team here, and it's good to be with you. And let me just say happy March. We made it through January and February, and for me personally, March marks one of my favorite holidays of the entire year, March Madness. And so if you're a celebrator, yeah, this is your time. If you thought I would mean St. Patrick's Day, that's crazy talk. We're going to finish our series of We this weekend. And let me just catch you up if you've not been here. The whole series, the whole point of We has been talking about the power of we, of how when we live not just as an I or a me, but there is just something good and inherently powerful about living like that, because we were never created to live alone. We were never created to go through life by ourselves. And we spent some weeks talking about how we do that. We said that we are one. We are united under the banner of Jesus, how we are connected, how we are different. And then even last week, I thought Matt Allman just did an amazing job saying that we are sent, that we are on mission. And all of those things have been leading us to this weekend, where we are going to talk about how we are the church. And to start, what I want to do is I just want to ask you a question that I want you to answer in your head. Maybe if you're taking notes, I want you to write it down in your notes. If you're taking notes on your phone, you can write it in your phone. But I want you to answer, what is the first thing or the first few things that come to your mind when you hear the word church? What's the first picture that pops in your head? What's the first memory? Maybe really importantly, what's that first feeling that creeps in when you hear that word church? If I had to assume, a lot of us in this room would probably just be like, what we're doing right now, right? Like, isn't this church, Jacob? Or isn't this what we're doing here together? And for a lot of us, this is the church, is what we're doing. Some of us, we're taken back to days of pews and hymnals. Anybody in there with me? Pews and hymnals. Some of you are like, I don't know what those words are. I think he just cussed at me. I'm not sure what that means. But I grew up, like in my early days, we went to a church that had pews and hymnals, and so those will always have a special place in my heart, especially being able to lay down on a pew. It was just a great moment in church. But more than that, maybe some of you come from a Catholic background, and so when you hear that word church, it takes you back to maybe what a Catholic church service looks like, and that's much different than what we do, and you're trying to figure out the differences and navigate that. But I don't want to be naive enough to think that every single person in here has only positive experiences and positive emotions when they hear that word church. And there's a reality of people in this room who, when you hear that word church, the first word you think of is hurt. And you're here right now, and I'm glad you're here, but you always have that with you in the back of your mind. And everyone in here has brought with them a different understanding, a different description of how they view that word church. And then you hear that we are the church, you think, okay, how do I navigate that? And there's some heaviness, and there's emotions, and there's memories, and there are thoughts with that. But what we got to do today is we got to get through all the descriptions of church, and we got to get to the heart and the definition of the church. Because if you are a follower of Jesus in this room, you have been called to be the church. And if you're in this room and you're not a follower of Jesus, number one, we're so glad you're here. But number two, this matters to you, because even if you don't care what I'm talking about right now, on some level, you have given Jesus or someone who follows Jesus a chance. And if you take that step of following Jesus eventually, you need to know what you're called to be. You are called to be the church. And if we want to know, and if we're honestly, if we want to be the church, not just know, but if we want to be the church, then we have to know what the church was truly meant to be. And so what I want to do is I just want to start by looking at that word church, because it kind of has a weird history and a weird origin. I don't know about you guys, but me and my friends in high school and college, we threw a party every year to watch the National Scripps Spelling Bee. You heard that correctly. It's a real thing that we did. We would get together and we'd start at 11 a.m. We'd watch for 6 hours, go to Huber's and get dinner, and then come back and watch the finals till midnight. And it was crazy. It was like the best time of our lives. And so when you watch, the National Scripps Spelling Bee, you see that words have different origins and they come from different places. And it's just so interesting to see this stuff. And like even words that we use all the time. Like for example, do you know the word muscle? It comes from a word that in English we would pronounce musculus. And the Romans kind of like coined this phrase because they saw people's arms. They saw people's bicep muscles specifically. And they said that it looked like little mice running in their arms. And so musculus actually means little mice. And so the reason that we call our muscles muscles is not because we're like buff, but because they look like little mice in our body. So next time you're at the gym and you see someone who's like super buff, just be like, dude, love those little mice. Like, you're looking good. Or next time you see Matt Allman, one of our other teaching pastors, just be like, hey, little mouse, what's up, my man? Like, it's good to see you. I was gonna demonstrate with my arms. Anyways, so another word that has a lot to do with like weird history is sarcasm. And it comes from this word, it's a Greek word that is sarkazon. And it means to tear the flesh. And it was a way of speaking that would literally, it was so bitter in how they would say it. It would said to tear your flesh when they talked. And so just remember that sticks and stones may break your bones, but sarcasm will tear your flesh. Now we get to the word church, though. And here's what's really interesting about this word church. Our English word church comes from a German word that is Kirche, or Kirche. It's a German word right there, you can write it down. And it is German, that's how you would say it. But English speakers got a hold of this word. And they saw it spelled like that, and they started to pronounce it as Kirch, Kirch. And so eventually you can kind of hear how it's supposed to be Kirche, and it went to Kirch, and then we got church. But even that word, the Kirche, it came from a Greek word that has biblical implications. It is a word called kuriakos. And kuriakos is found in the Old Greek, and it just simply means to me belonging to the Lord. Like when something was kuriakos, it belonged to the Lord. But what's really interesting about this is not innately a Christian word. When it says belonging to the Lord, it's not an uppercase L, it's a lowercase l. And so it could mean belonging to a master or belonging to a landlord to some degree. But the Christians adopted this word, and they described where they would meet, the places they would meet as kuriakos. And so then it eventually became this idea of house of the Lord. The house that we're meeting in belongs to the Lord. And then you just go and go and go, and eventually you see how it goes kuriakos into kirche, into kirch, into church. What's really interesting, even here's just a little knowledge nugget for you. The root of that word kuriakos is the idea of to bend. And so when it says the house of the Lord, or belonging to the Lord, and it was a place to meet, it was the place that the Christians would bend to the will of the Lord. Beautiful sentiment to get to the place that we're at today. And you would think with something like that, that's super interesting and it has a cool meaning to bend and it's the house of the Lord. You would think that word would just be littered throughout the Bible, that the New Testament would have so many cool verses and cool things to say about kuriakos. But minimum of 105 times is the word church used in the New Testament, regardless of what version you're using, minimum of 105 times. The word kuriakos is used to describe the church or used for church in the New Testament 0 times. And I find it interesting. It's the reason that we call it the church. We call Northside Christian Church, comes from kirch, comes from kirche, comes from kuriakos, but that word in the Bible is never used to describe church. It's used twice in the whole Bible. Once it's used to describe the Lord's day, so belonging to the Lord, and once it's used to describe the Lord's supper, belonging to the Lord. But it's never used to describe the church. And it just makes me want to know why. And I think the answer is simple, and you might already see this one coming. But it's because the church was never simply meant to be a place to meet. And I want to show you, if we want to be the church, we have to know what it was truly meant to be. I want to show you when Jesus talked about the church, what it was truly meant to be. So let me invite you right now to get your Bibles or your phones or your iPads and go to Matthew 16 with me. Matthew 16, we're going to start in verse 13. I just think there's so much power when we read the word of God together, and specifically today as we talk about some words that you can see them in there for yourself. Now, I'm going to be reading from the NLT if you want to read the word for word with me. If you want to just guess at different points of what I'm saying, read any other version of the Bible. And so, Matthew 16, 13 in the NLT starts like this. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, hey, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. And pause really quickly there. And if you're a note taker or underliner, I want you just to circle where they're at, Caesarea Philippi. because the location here really matters. Caesarea Philippi would have been known in that day as a religious epicenter of the world. Every major religion could be seen or represented in this location. There's even theories about the exact location that Jesus was standing because of some of the stuff that he says later in these verses. But within this, everywhere around them is just a nod to major religions. They're next to a mountain that would be the source of the Jordan River. And for the Jordan River, the Jewish faith, this was so important to them. The Israelites started to go back into the promised land in Joshua 3 when they crossed the Jordan River. And it was that same river that God stopped so that they could walk across. It's a big deal to the Jewish faith. You go even a little further and you get back to the Syrian god, Baal, or maybe you've heard it as Baal before. And there'd be a temple there that the people of Baal, the people who worship Baal, would go in and they would worship. And what they would do is they would walk into this cave. And this cave was literally called the gates of Hades because they thought that at the bottom of this cave where this river was that ran, that it led to the underworld. They thought it led to hell. And so they would take prisoners down there with them. And they would throw them into the water. And they said, okay, if you live when we throw you into this water, then you're innocent. But if you die, then you're guilty and you're just gonna go down to hell anyways. And so they take him in there and they throw him in there and there's always rocks at the bottom of this river and they're always guilty and they always floated down and died. But that's how they worshiped Baal there. You go a little further and there's the Greek god Pan is represented there. And Pan is a man that would be understood as half man and half goat. And he's the god of music and fertility. And the way that they worship the Pan and they tried to get him to come back, they tried to entice him to come back to the world, is that they would do, I'm just gonna be straight up honest with you, they would do detestable things to goats. And then they would kill them and they'd throw them into that river and send them down to go to Pan to be like, hey, will you come back and worship with us? There was even a temple that was supposed to be so incredible to Caesar that was built so that the Romans could engage in emperor worship. And so it is right here with every major religion in the known world around them, with the gates of Hades, as it was called, standing right over there, that Jesus says, who am I? Who do people say that I am? And the disciples say, well, some people think you're a prophet, John the Baptist, or Jeremiah, or some people say Elijah, or maybe other prophets. But then he turns the questions. He kind of cranks it up a little bit, and he turns it towards them. And in verse 15, he says, but who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And he turns this question to them. And he says, okay, I hear what other people saying about me, but who do you say that I am? And Peter, for the first time ever, says that you, Jesus, are the Messiah. You are the one we've been waiting for. You are the Christ. You are the final king from God. When he says that phrase, Son of the living God, it means that he understands the authority and the deity that exists within Jesus. He says, you're not just another good dude. You're not just another prophet, but there's something different about you, Jesus. You are the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. And Jesus is like, wow, Peter, that's smart. You're smart. Not that smart. That's from God. God gave that one to you, all right? I can't give you too much credit here. And then he says this, and this is where we're going to just harp in for a few minutes. He says, now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. Now let's pause for a second because words matter here again. He says, you are Peter, which means rock. And that word right there, Peter, it is Petros. And yes, it means rock, but it's like stone or pebble or just like rock that you can hold. And then he says, and upon this rock, and that time he says rock, he says Petra. And so it's two different words. Please note that. Petros and Petra are two different words. He says, okay, you are a rock you can hold. But upon this rock, Petra, which is a huge rock, a mountain, the side of a cliff, like a just ginormous, huge rock, I will build my church. And what he's saying in that moment is he's saying, okay, Peter, you are like rock man of the rock. And because you are man of the rock man, because of this rock. And just to be very clear, it is not Peter that the church is going to be built on, but it's that confession. The reason that Peter is rock man is because of what he said, that confession of he is the Messiah, he is the Son of God. And he says that he's going to build his church. Interesting piece. This is the first time that the word church is used in the Bible. In Matthew 16, Jesus says, and upon this rock I will build my church. And interestingly enough, it is not the word kyriakos. It is a different word. It is ekklesia, if you want to write that down. Ekklesia. And this word is interesting too. It just means called out group or assembly or people. And I wish that had a bunch of like theological meaning. I wish I could be like, listen to this, guys. If you rearrange the letters, it tells you the location of heaven, the Bahamas. But it doesn't do that, right? Like, it is just a plain word. It's a plain everyday word. And I think Jesus did that on purpose. He says, I'm not going to just build some place. I'm going to build a group, an assembly, a called out people. That will be the church that I am building. For our purposes today, he says, I'm building a we. It's not just going to be one person. It's not just going to be a place. It is going to be a we, a group of people who will walk together. To use that rock analogy again, he says, I'm going to build my church, a big, huge stone, living stone, little rock by living stone. And then he says this. He says, that's going to be the church. It's a people. And the powers of hell will not conquer it. He drops that bomb on them. He says it's going to be a people and it's not going to be overcome. The statement is both literal and figurative to some degree, because if you're reading in the NIV in your Bible, that statement would say this, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Pause. Do you remember where we're at? He's in Caesarea Philippi. And it's understood, or it's guessed by a lot of theologians, that when he says this in Matthew 16, he was almost gesturing to the cave known as the gates of Hades. That he'd be standing there, and right there would have been this cave that is known for all these different gods. And the disciples were like, you can't talk about it, it's right there. Right? Jesus come on, man, don't say that. But he's saying, all these other religions you see around you will rise and fall. The church will not stop. The temple of Caesar is right there. And he says political powers will rise and fall, but the church will keep going. Nations that you know will rise and fall, but the church will not end. Wars will start and wars will end, but the church will not stop. Even in Revelation, it says that the world will give way, but the church will not stop. Because the church is unstoppable. But then even figuratively, when it says that phrase, the powers of hell, it's understood that he's meaning every weapon that hell could throw at us cannot overcome the church. Which means, hear me on this, sin cannot overcome the church, and we are the church. Now, to be clear, this does not mean that people in the church are just automatically going to stop sinning. I'm going to shock you right here. You will sin. All right, I hope that's not a shock to you. But what's hard is that reality can go with the church and it can hurt people. And let me just say, if you're someone in this room who has been hurt by someone in the church who in a moment was not acting as someone of the church, I'm so sorry. This is the reality that sin exists in this world, and that the Lord built a people, not just a place. But this is a reminder that no matter how much sin Satan tries to throw at us, the church cannot be overcome. And there will always be people who will pull us back, and there will always be the forgiveness of Jesus and the grace of Jesus, where it says that when sin increases, grace increases all the more. And there will always be the church that is willing and welcome to open people with open arms, and it will not overcome us. Death will not beat the church, and people in the church will die, but the church will not die. Hell will not prevail because Jesus has won. That's the power of the church, that nothing can conquer it. It will not end. It is unstoppable. I have a friend, his name's Matt Fleener. He's actually hilarious enough backstage right now getting ready for baptism weekend. And he has a song a worship song that anytime we sang it, he would always just love it. And one time we sang it and he came up to me afterwards and he said, man, that song makes me want to run to the gates of hell with a water gun. And I was always like, what an interesting sentiment, my friend Matthew. Like, I've never thought of that before. And then I read that verse and I'm like, let me get my super soaker, dude. Like, let's go, because we cannot be stopped and nothing can beat the church. Everything else will fall away and the church will still remain, because he says, this is what I'm building. The church is the future. And I think oftentimes we get it confused. We think that the church is just simply a monument to the past. We come to church and we're like, I can't wait for a history lesson, or I can't wait to see what Jesus used to be. But don't forget, Acts 1:1 says that this is what Jesus began to do and teach, and that the church is the continuation of everything that Jesus did and is still doing to this day, because the church cannot be stopped. It's not a monument to the past. It is a movement of the future. And church, we are that church. It is who we have been called to be. Here's the question. How do we do it? How do we make sure that we are being that church? Because if we want to be the church that Jesus asked us to be, then we have to know what it's truly meant to be. And it's meant to be a people that are on mission for him. So how do we be the church? I got two ways for you. I got two practices to walk this out. And if you're a note taker, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you really get those practices in. And because I went to Bible college, they both start with C, so you're welcome. So the first one is commit. If you want to be the church, if we want to be a bunch of eyes that become a collective we, then what we have to do is we have to commit. This comes from Acts 2, 42 through 47. It says, they committed themselves to the teaching of the apostles, the life together, the common meal, and the prayers. And all the believers lived in a wonderful harmony, holding everything in common. They sold whatever they owned and pooled their resources so that each person's need was met. They followed a daily discipline of worship in the temple, followed by meals at home. Every meal a celebration, exuberant and joyful as they praised God. People in general liked what they saw. Every day their number grew as God added those who were saved. And hear this, that first word right there, it says they committed. For the early church, this is the first church, by the way. For the early church, being the church was a way of life that they committed to. Being the church was a way of life that they committed to. Look at all the things it says they committed to. They committed to the apostles' teachings. And it wasn't just something that they endured and they're like, oh, who's preaching today? Oh, Peter, great, the rock, right? Like, we don't want him again. No, it wasn't that. They said, man, what does God have for me today? And they listened and they digested and they examined and they let it examine their lives and they applied it to their lives. They were committed to the teaching of the apostles. They committed themselves to the life together. And it wasn't just a bunch of I's and me's in this church, but it says that they lived in wonderful harmony, holding everything in common. They committed to doing life together every single day. I love a memory I have during the early days of COVID. It was April of 2020 when the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, came out. And me and my friends were kind of like, man, we have to watch this together. Like, this is such an important documentary. This is life-changing, right? Like, this is going to change our lives. We're going to watch this documentary together. And so we made a plan to watch it the night it came out, one of the episodes, and we knew the night was going to be. We knew where we were going to go. We were going to set a TV up in a driveway and just hang out and have a good time outside. And then we saw the weather forecast for that night. It was one of those April nights in southern Indiana where God just wants to make us sad sometimes, I guess. And it was 30 degrees. It was going to be 30 degrees. And so we were like, what do we do? And we said, hey, we're going to commit to this. And so out we all walked to this driveway with multiple blankets wrapped around us, with all these folding chairs, with hats and all this stuff. We must have looked absolutely crazy to everyone else in this neighborhood watching us. But to us, we said, we're going to commit to this together. And we watched Michael Jordan documentary in freezing weather because we said we're going to commit to the life together. How much more important is it to live life together than the Michael Jordan documentary? I know it's funny to say out loud, but sometimes it's almost as if those things can matter more than what we're doing in here. And the life together, holding everything in common, living in wonderful harmony together, they committed themselves to it. They committed to praying for each other. They committed to communion, the Lord's Supper. They committed to sharing their resources. And I love this because it never says that they worried about how much they could keep. It was all about how much they could give to make sure that everyone else had what they needed. And they committed to worship in the temple and to meals at home. And let me just pause for a second and talk about that. See, for the early church, for them, being the church was committing to a way of life. It wasn't just attending an event. And for them, meeting in the temple was a part of what they did. You saw that. It says daily they had a rhythm of meeting in the temple for worship. But that's the deal. It was just a part of it. And for some of us, we have boiled down following Jesus, being the church, to attending an event for an hour on a weekend. And this is not to belittle what we do in this room at all. It is an important thing. The same way that they did it there, we do it here. But being the church is committing to a way of life. And honestly, if we walk in this room and we're thinking, I just want to get something out of it. I'm here for my hour. I want to get something out of it. Can you give me something? You want to know the best way to get something out of the church is to give something to it. Is to apply yourself to it, to invest in it with your time and with who you are as a person, with what you have, because then you're going to get the most out of it in the most surprising ways. And they invested into it, they gave everything to it, and they got the most out of it because they committed to it. And then it says that people in general around them liked what they saw. I remember one time my friends and I were at my parents' house. We were playing basketball, and just to be honest, we're not the best basketball players in the entire world. We're just having a good time. When we look over to the back, and we see a little kid watching us from his backyard. And he has a basketball in his arm. He's just standing on the fence, just looking at us, just, with nothing behind the eyes, just staring at us like this. It was very creepy. And so we're like, all right, like, hello, child. And so we kept playing basketball. And then we look back a few minutes later, and this kid has thrown the basketball into our yard, but is still standing on his side of the fence. And we're like, okay, interesting how that happened, I wonder. And we keep playing, we look back again. He's now in our yard with the basketball, just standing, staring at us, not moving. And we're like, is he teleporting? Like, what is happening right now? We do this a few more times. He just keeps getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And eventually he's just standing right next to us on the side of the court. And finally we're just like, hello, child. Like, would you like to play basketball with us? And he says, oh, wow, yeah, sure, I guess, right? Like, if you're asking. And so we had just finished the game, and so he gets out there, and he's hitting a couple shots, and we're cheering for him. We're like, yeah, man, we're trying to be good neighbors to him. And eventually, it's been 5 minutes, and he shot his baskets, and I was like, I want to play basketball. And so I said, okay, man, hey, you can stay and watch if you want to, but we're going to play basketball now, so you got to kind of stand over here. He did not like that. I said that to him, and he screamed at me and then ran back to his house and jumped the fence. And I'm not joking. I have never seen this kid again, all right? If you're here in the room, I'm sorry. Please come and talk to me after this. But here's what I think. I don't think this little boy from across the yard looked at us and was just like, those must be NBA players. I think he saw something he desperately wanted. He saw some other people experiencing what he desperately wanted, and to him, it was irresistible. So should it be with the church, that people desperately want what only Jesus can provide, and the community that is only found within the church, and that people should look at how we live and commit to each other and say, oh, I want that too. It should be irresistible. In that day, people who did not love Jesus looked at the church being the church and said, that's good. I like what I see. And the Lord blessed them for it. They committed their time, attention, money, resources, talents, devotion, worship, meals, their lives to Jesus because they were the church. If you want to be the church, commit. Second one, last one, confess. If you want to be the church, confess. This goes back to Matthew 16. in the religious epicenter of the world with every religion around them, Jesus asked this question to his disciples. He'd say, hey, who do people say that I am? And they give him some answers. I think those answers would change today. There's lots of different things that people say that Jesus is. Some people say he's just a really good dude. Some people say he's a prophet that we can learn from. Some people say he didn't exist. Some people say he's a liar. Some people say he's the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And they answer, but then he turns it to them and he says, who do you say that I am? Church, hear me on this. Every person is being asked that question. Who do you say that Jesus is? And for some of you in the room, you're like, man, I've already confessed this. Like years ago, I made this confession. Years ago, I stood in the baptism pool. Like, I'm good to go. We can skip on to the next one. But I hope you know that every day, with how you live, what you say, you are confessing who Jesus is to you. And the way that you conduct your life is a confession. For some of us in the room, you've confessed it, that Jesus is your Lord, but what you need to do now is what we talked about last week. You need to confess it to somebody else. And there's someone who's been on your mind, maybe they've been on your mind all week after talking about how we are sent. And now you're knowing that like what you have to do is go confess who Jesus is to you, to someone else. Who's that person that needs to know who Jesus is to you so that Jesus can be that to them? But then other people in this room, you've never made that confession before. Maybe you've been to coming to Northside for a long time and you've just never taken that step of saying like, okay, this is who Jesus is to me. Maybe you've never been here before. It's your first time here. You didn't expect to be hit by the Holy Spirit in a way that you were today, and you're feeling something. You're not even sure what it is, and you're finding out right now there's a thing called the Holy Spirit that's talking to you. You're like, this is crazy talk. This is how the Lord works. But there's a confession waiting for all of us, and if you want to be the church, then maybe for you today, it's confessing Jesus as the Lord, as the Messiah for the very first time. He is asking us, who do you say that I am? And how you answer that question, who you say Jesus is, defines who you are. Romans 10:9-10 says, if you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. It says that if you believe that Jesus is who he says he is, that all the things he said, that he came to give life and life to the full, that he is the resurrection and the life, that whoever believes in him, even though they will perish, they will live forever. If you believe that Jesus can literally change your life and your death, you believe that, and you say it out loud, you confess it, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith, and you are saved. Acts 2:41. It's the verse right before all that big first church business. You know what it says? It's interesting to me. It says, those who believed what Peter said were baptized and added to the church that day, about 3,000 in all. And there's this understanding that being the church is confessing who Jesus is to you. There is never a weekend where we will disallow someone from being in this place. Anyone is welcome to come in here. Anyone is welcome to walk into these doors and to hear the good news of Jesus. But man, if you're looking to get the most out of this, if you're looking for the power of if you're looking for what only Jesus can give, and you're looking at the church thinking, man, I want what they have, I don't know how to get it. It's not something we do in this room. It is who Jesus is to us every single day. If you want to get the most out of it, then give the most to it. Give your life. It's baptism weekend. It's an opportunity to outwardly express an inward confession. And with baptism weekend, I know it comes up just a bunch of easy excuses. But we've got opportunities and answers for every excuse. We've got the water, it's warm, 92 degrees. We've got towels that are clean and are not scratchy. We've got hair dryers. We've got extra trunks. We've got shirts. We've got changing stations. We've got people that walk with you and answer questions. We're just waiting for you. You weren't called to simply come to church, but to be the church, to commit, it's to confess. If it's your day, if it's your time, if you're feeling it, to confess who Jesus is to you for the first time. We're going to have people at the bottom of the stage on both sides by the stairs who are willing to walk with you and to help you take that step. I'm going to pray. We're going to worship. God, we love you. Lord, you are so good, and you are so faithful, and you are so merciful. And Lord, I think there's just a quality of you that's just so big that we can't even fathom what you can do and how powerful you are, and yet within how big you are, you still care for us. And you care for us enough to ask us each that question, well, who do you say that I am? And God, I just pray that today this is not seen as an accusatory question, but Lord, it's just a question that's dripping with grace and care and love. Well, who do you say that I am? And Lord, what I hope is that for people in this room who have never made that confession of you before, that today they answer that by saying, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God who changes everything for us. We love you, Lord. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.